This is a special presentation from 12 Corners Middle School.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. My name is Kevin McGowan. I'm the superintendent of schools. For those of you that I have not had the pleasure of meeting, I can't wait until we're in person and we can meet directly. I'm sure you share that sentiment, although you probably think you can wait at least until it's healthier, which of course we all feel too. I'd like to thank for joining us tonight, Mr. James Nunez. Jim is the principal at the middle school. Sarah Jacob, who is an assistant principal, as is Dr. Mike Malloy, joining us as well. Our board president, Mark Kokonovich, I see on the screen. Deanna Spagnola, our director of student services. Assistant superintendent Debbie Baker. Our assistant superintendent for administration, Lou Limo, I know is on as well. And I'm sure there are other board members and administrators who are here to answer your questions and joining the conversation as needed. We're really glad that you could join us and taking time to offer us some feedback. This is the plan for tonight is we'll go through some thought exchange feedback, both in the hybrid exchange and the remote exchange. Follow up on some of your comments there. Then we'll go into the chat as well. And Dr. Malloy, I know, is monitoring that chat and will help answer some questions. I'm sure Ms. Jacob will as well and facilitate some of that question answer. And then certainly the floor is always open. You can unmute, jump in wherever you like. But at that point, too, we'll ask if anybody has questions for us to follow up on. And then at the end, we'll take a look at the Facebook Live comments as well and make sure we're answering any of those that come up. So we're going to right now just jump into the feedback shared and go through some of your questions right now and some of your thoughts. And the first one at the top of the exchange here, as it has been in many cases in each of the other school exchanges, is about coming back in the fall. And there are a few other comments in each of the exchanges about Wednesdays, about bringing kids in for more days, all sorts of conversation around that. So I want to kind of start the evening by addressing those topics. We are absolutely hopeful that we can have all kids back in the fall 5 days a week. Could not agree more with this first comment shared about it being critical for their education and social development. Matter of fact, we would love to have them back right now. The difficulty for us in that is this: we need to still have 6 feet of social distancing for all students, so we don't have enough space to have everybody in. If we could, we would in a heartbeat. Different schools have a different amount of square footage. They have a different number of adults available and resource capacity to be able to move kids differently in that space and have them supervised appropriately in smaller groups. That's why you see throughout New York State lots of different answers to these problems. We have created the safest environment we can with that social distancing and are stretched to our max in terms of the number of people that can be in the building and still have that social distance. That will be up to public health experts to change whether or not that will be something still that is needed in school. We are also focused on the idea that until people are vaccinated, meaning the adults in school who are most likely to be at higher risk for spreading and contracting COVID, that it still would be very difficult to open up if that changes. I don't see the distancing changing anyways, but we're advocating for greater access to the vaccine so that perhaps will be possible. Because again, we would like nothing more than kids to be back in the building, but it has to be when it's safe. And there's a lot out there in terms of this discussion in the media that it has been said by the president and others that we should be reopening, and the head of the CDC saying teachers don't need to be vaccinated for that to happen. But I'd like to clarify what they're actually talking about, because in the weeds, it's different than just the headline. And that is this: we are reopened. What they're discussing when they talk about reopening is schools where nobody has darkened the doorway since last year, where they have been all remote, particularly in some large urban centers and small rurals. And they're saying that you should be reopening. We are reopened. We are not fully reopened, and we recognize that. That's really not what they're getting at. So then when you make the jump to the not everybody needs to be vaccinated before you open, in other words, open like we have, and that's correct. Not everybody does need to be vaccinated. And in our environment, that was the case when we did reopen. So we have various constituencies not the least of which, of course, is your children, but also our staff members who we're entrusted to keep safe also. And we feel very strongly that full access to vaccination is important for us to maintain the healthiest environment we can for them. But that also is maintaining the healthiest environment for your children. So those are the concerns we have around that. We would open 5 days a week in a heartbeat if we could. It's got to be done, though, safely at the right time. In terms of Wednesdays, other school districts have started to alternate the Wednesday with more in-person instruction. We've chosen instructionally not to do that at this point. We'll continue to monitor that. A lot of that is a symptom of their feeling that maybe their remote program on Wednesdays is not meeting particular needs. We are not saying that we have a perfect situation or that we've mastered it better than others, but we feel as though that program is working to a point where if you consider the cost benefit instructionally of having an every other in-person day through the remainder of the year, which likely would result in ballpark 10 days of in-person instruction, it would also result in 10 more days of asynchronous instruction. And so the cost benefit of that versus having 20 more days of Wednesdays, the way they're currently constituted, we've decided at this point that instructionally it would be better to do that than have another 10 days of asynchronous with the benefit of 10 days of in-person. So that's currently our thinking. We'll continue to monitor that, but we're not planning on making a change in that area. And that's our instructional decision, which may differ from other districts. We understand that. And they have approached those days differently as well throughout. So right now, that's kind of the reopening conversation for us and what we're thinking. I also get the conversation where people have said, hey, how come you can wrestle, but you can't have kids back in a classroom? I'm not a public health expert. I'm fond of saying I'm not a useful doctor. I couldn't speak to why that is the decision, other than as it's been explained to me, with only 2 people on the mat at the same time wrestling. Our kids are masked when they're wrestling. And the amount of time they'd be exchanging respiratory droplets versus a classroom with a larger number of people exchanging those droplets for a longer period of time, that the risk assessment that's been done by public health experts, not by us, is that is most appropriate at this point. We're hopeful that that's a harbinger of things to come and that we can have more conversations about the arts, and that there are constant conversations about distancing and what will make the most sense to bring more kids back and thinking about those distances. I'm going to go back to, again, though, a cornerstone of that is the adults that they're with as well and access to the vaccine in that regard. So that's kind of where we're at. And certainly as we get to the chat and other questions, happy to get further into that as well. You know, I went through the thoughts with Mr. Nunez earlier today, and we talked about study halls, and we know that's a concern for people as well. What else could they do during that time? Are there service projects? And that's certainly feedback that the building's going to bring back and think about as well. It comes up a couple different times around study halls. Any thoughts on that you'd like to share, Mr. Nunez?
Well, we certainly agree that, the number of study halls for some students is reason for concern. So we definitely agree with the sentiment. We definitely agree that there ought to be some flexibility. We certainly have been looking at it. We've been discussing it as an administrative team as to what we can do to be more creative with it. We're certainly open to some flexibility with regards to what can be done in those classrooms. So we would agree that there is some concern for them, but it is certainly on our radar to be addressing as we move forward.
Thank you. A couple of other comments here that are really feedback pieces that I would say to you we will address and pass along. Certainly one here about in-person days need to be active teaching and not used for finishing work or on assignments. It's a great point that when we have kids in front of us, not knowing the detail around exactly what was happening there or what the instructional design was, I'd say certainly reach out so we can talk through that with you. But that's a very fair point to bring up. We'd want to dig further into exactly what the point of whatever the activity was and how that was associated to the instruction as well. And then a comment here about concerns regarding students being communicated to parents in a more timely fashion, not right before the end of the quarter, and same with behavioral issues. We do work on that and we do think about that. That is something that we encourage and it is a best practice. Certainly something, a good reminder for us to be passing along. And generally speaking, we think that happens, but appreciate that point being made. This person, let's be creative and proactive about increasing time in school and phasing out home learning, make use of outdoors, increase rapid testing or implement saliva pool tests, eliminate study halls and add extra half days in person, don't wait. So significant number of suggestions here. First of all, the rapid testing is when we receive supply from the county, which we currently have requested to continue our testing program and have not been able to get supply of that yet to continue the program. And the rapid testing or saliva pool testing is not something we have the capability to implement ourselves as a school, as opposed to a health agency, from a resource capacity as well, but also that doesn't allow us then to reopen any differently. There's nothing in the regulation right now that recognizes the use of a testing program in order to have more activity at school. Eliminating study halls or adding extra half days of in-person are all a resource capacity issue, and having both the space to do so, but also staff members to do so. We realized that by cutting foreign language in 6th grade last year, we created more study halls. We knew that. We communicated that to the community. That was an implication of the budget process and a lack of resources, and choices had to be made, and that was what the result was. We really deeply regret not having the resources to continue to support that program. It is not what we would have wanted to do, but given the choices at that time, that was a choice that had to be made. There's a comment here about some schools began the year and now they're at 4 or 5 days. This all has to do with space and adult availability, right? So there are other places where they have added days because they are very small districts with very small populations. Their class sizes to begin with were small enough that they could have looked at having kids back full time and still provide social distancing. And, many of us are very familiar with some of those districts. Very, very small, but they have buildings that were built at a time when they were much larger. So as the districts have gotten smaller, they have space that was programmed originally for many more kids. So some feedback here about Zoom Wednesday and a teacher on for 5 or 10 minutes and then sent offline to finish up work or work independently, some canceled classes. We can definitely address that and speak with staff members about that. There are times when people are also trying to be very cognizant of the amount of time kids are spending on screen, especially if it's period after period for that whole day. And so the idea of making some adjustments and have them work in breakout rooms or offline or independently is to try and find the right mix to address instructional needs in the classroom. But it's a fair point, and we appreciate that feedback too. Great positive comment here about band teachers working so hard to still make band work under those conditions as well. We appreciate that. Many of the other comments regarding return to school, et cetera. So I want to jump over to the all remote feedback as well. Stop the share and then start a different share so we can go through some of that. Remote teachers doing an incredible job, even with all the challenges involved. Amazing learning is happening. I believe my child is much more engaged in learning than he would have been in the hybrid program because he has much more face-to-face time with his teachers. So really glad to hear that's working as well. A comment here which was really helpful, actually. I see that the morning show is happening at school. Is there a way to get pertinent information to remote learners? This is the normal way that kids would learn about what is happening in school. He misses being part of community. And when we went through this comment, by the way, we go through every single comment and pass along all of the feedback and address every single one wherever it is rated in the exchange, whether it's first or last. We go through every one. And this is a really good suggestion that we're going to pass along to first period teachers too for remote learners. That'd be a great way to reconnect remote learners a little bit more to school. Now that Tcms has succeeded academically with the first half of the year, it'd be great to see a real emphasis on connection to school and community for remote students. In the second half of the year, lunches with the principal, vice principal, other staff, even hybrid remote lunches on hybrid kid stays at home. Again, great suggestion and something that we can think of. We're really trying to think about better ways to connect, to have activities in school for those that are hybrid, but to think about these for remote learners also. So I really appreciate that. I know that's feedback that's very helpful for us. Our student, like many, I'm sure, has adjusted to the remote environment, is making the best of it, and luckily is doing well. However, there's not a collective feel with the hybrid students clubs or TCMS community at large. Our student often feels left out. So again, really important feedback for us because we don't want that to be the case. We want to find a way, especially now that we're in the second half of the year, to reconnect kids. Great comment here about teachers doing an excellent job engaging my son in learning. Thank you, teachers, for all you do. We appreciate that as well. A suggestion here about keep breaking kids into breakout rooms. It gives kids a connection that's so needed during this time. It's been invaluable. Thank you. A student of the month feedback about communication, making sure that gets out to everybody. Great point and helpful in helping us improve our practice. Clubs activities, can they be resumed remotely? If they have resumed, can you emphasize them in your next TCMS newsletter? Absolutely, we would love to do that. So again, a lot of great feedback here from people in the remote world, which we will pass along, and lots of positives, but things for us to learn from as well. I want to stop that share now and not just talk at you, but have an opportunity to talk more with you. And just start out by asking if there's anything in the chat, Sarah or Mike, that you could ask and bring up.
Yep, there's one comment a comment or question in the chat, and there's an agreement to it, is that the Wednesday lunchtime is too short, and that sometimes students struggle to make it back to their post-lunch class in time, and that the teachers are a little impatient with that. And so the question was, could the lunch be extended, or can the teachers be more understanding?
Yeah, I'm going to be candid that the schedule probably won't change at this point because of all that goes in and what could coordinate around the schedule. But I think that feedback around people being understanding is very fair, and that's something we can definitely pass along. So it's a really good point, and we want to make sure from a health perspective too that kids are taking that time to do that. So thanks for that feedback too.
Sure. And then there's just a new question added. Has there been any discussion about outdoor ed for sixth graders who missed it this fall, even if it's a day program instead of an overnight?
Mr. Nunez, any thought on that?
We certainly have been discussing it most certainly for the fall. For this year, we have not yet have any thoughts on it. We'd have to reach out and see what guidelines would stipulate with regards to having that number of students at their facility right now and what their expectations are given the guidelines. So it'd be something that we can certainly look into.
I do know too that under a normal year, under normal circumstances, the space there is booked, years in advance. I would imagine, although I don't know, that the availability might be quite a bit more open given the COVID situation, but that is one difficulty. We usually have to book it 2 years in advance to get the weekends that we want, or under normal circumstances.
So I see a question here from Farah about barriers 6 feet, and happy to talk about this. That Dr. Mendoza has in this county recommended 6 feet rather than barriers. And this is a really interesting topic. I will tell you that I completely agree with him, but the conversation that we've had, and again, he's the public health person, is if you think about the barrier, there is zero scientific evidence at this point that barriers are at all helpful. So picture this, the barrier comes to here, perhaps it comes to here, whatever it may be. In the classroom, that air continues to circulate and there continues to be exposure to respiratory droplets. Air doesn't just sit still, right? So it's not just that if that plastic is in front of your face that the respiratory droplets will stop right there. The other issue that we have is if you had barriers, which you're talking about likely if we were to do that district-wide, $500,000 investment in the plastic alone. And if you had that set up, and bring more people in, you're now doubling the amount of exposure, and those aren't bubbles. It's a barrier that is temporary and is not proved to really stop that circulation of air. The other issue is that you then need the space to have everybody be able to eat with their mask off in a safe way for that period of time. And that requires still then more distance because people would have their mask off. And it wouldn't be just 3 feet with a barrier, it would be further, and you don't have the capacity to do that in our buildings. Then you're also talking about double the number of people moving through hallways, and you're not walking with a barrier around you. So there's a lot to be said for the notion that barriers are not a solution to the problem, and it really continues to be, the science says, 6 feet of distance. Now, will that change? Could that change? Could that change if more people who are at risk are vaccinated? Perhaps, but right now, that is the conversation that, yes, Dr. Mendoza has recommended that as a best practice in the area, and what our safety committee over the summer and planning, along with the other public schools in Monroe County, continues to support. There is a question here sent directly about a possibility of fully remote learning for next year and or in the future. I think that's an excellent question. The issue, I would guess, and by the way, I would say I've gotten most guesses wrong throughout the pandemic, like many people, but I would guess that the state will require some type of remote option for people, certainly into next year, before there's wide availability of a vaccine for children and testing done on that. So it would not shock me at all, and that's certainly something that is on our mind and in our planning. I don't know if it would look exactly what it looks like this year. We're really starting to think now about making sure we have resources available for that and what that would require. But I do think that's certainly possible. There's another question about not full Zoom classes on Wednesday. This is school time. That would not count school time on Zoom as screen time, which we would try to limit. When I say screen time, I don't mean screen time relative to what we talk about with kids, either on a computer playing or playing games, for example, or television. I guess what I mean is the appropriateness of receiving instruction on a screen for that entire duration, and really being thoughtful about attention span, about how well that works, the engagement on the screen, and trying to differentiate those activities. Other questions? Anything else in the chat, Sarah, Mike, that you see?
No, we covered the chat.
Floor's open. If anybody would like to comment, unmute themselves, please. This is your time.
Hi. So my question about lunches, the particular concern that my daughter has, she's always concerned about her classmates, is that some of her classmates are not as lucky as she is with a parent making her lunch for her on Wednesdays. And there are a bunch of families where the kids are home alone and having to really fend for themselves. So I think that's her concern. That's why I put that out there. That's really the concern, is those kids are having to really fend for themselves, make their own lunches, eat them within a very short amount of time, and then they're showing up even just a minute late and the teachers are getting upset with them. So I think, you know, what I've been asked to impart to you folks is is just if the teachers can be just mindful of the fact that is the situation for quite a number of students.
So I say this kindly and gently, colleague to colleague, but also dad to mom. I would also say, and as a parent who's had kids through the building in that age, I know this is far easier said than done, right? We're starting later. So the other good news is there could be perhaps some time in the morning for kids before the day starts to prepare their lunch if they have to do that. And I don't mean that at all to be difficult, sarcastic, or whatnot, but I think in thinking about that day, and it's, again, easy to say it's an independent day and not ideal for anybody, but maybe that's part of the solution, is just that executive function skill of, hey, listen, and if I'm a teacher and it comes off as annoyed, I might say, or be saying to that child, hey, listen, could you make your sandwich in the morning when you get up? Like, get ready, have that prepared, and then you'll be better able to make use of that time when we come on. And I do mean that kindly. I don't mean that as, well, they should just do it in the morning, but I think it is worth thinking about planning at that age level. I think that's probably appropriate to say.
And that might be something that I would encourage the school to talk about with the students, that if they're having difficulty with that, you know, thinking about those sorts of things. They are at an age where, you know, there's definitely some butting heads. So I get that, and God forbid that you should ask them to do anything. But I want to push you one step further, Natalie. I wonder, though, if they have that conversation, if it's interpreted by the kids then as being mean or not understanding. You know what I'm getting at? So maybe they have. I mean, that is a possibility. That doesn't mean, though, this isn't really good feedback for us to express back and remind people, because I think that's a very good point.
Dr. McGowan, if I may too, plug our school lunch program.
Please.
We have capacity to be able to deliver if there's hardships, and we can get our buses that are available on Wednesday to drop off. We have capacity to be able to help families more. Just got to reach out to our food service director, and we'd be happy to put you on the list, on the Wednesday distribution list.
Yeah, and that could be very helpful too. So, and I do appreciate that, Natalie. I hesitate to give that constructive feedback because it sounds like I'm just saying, hey, they should do, but to be honest, that's something for kids to think about too.
Kevin, can I just jump in real quick?
Please.
I would say too, Natalie, I think through our counseling staff, through groups, through Mike, Jim, and I being able to just, wander lunches and talk to the kids, that's certainly, like, we're troubleshooting a lot of these asynchronous and full remote things, because it's not just lunch. There's lots of different, things that we've been talking about, and helping to reinforce and helping those kids navigate on those days. Because you're right, a lot of kids are, home alone or whatever it might be, and it's really easy at 11, 12, and 13 to sleep in or not plan for things. I mean, that's just the nature of that developmental age group. So we can do that too on our end, with not just the lunches, but other things as well.
Thank you. I did my job. Thank you.
Tell your daughter, you carried the message. You did it. I often have to get off these things and say, yes, I did bring that up. I promise. I swear. Anybody else like to unmute themselves? Naveen, a great suggestion. In the current time when students are remote most of the days, can we have a bit more focus on improving their presentation skills as they're not in person? They can be given a topic to prepare and present. Yes, I think that's actually really good feedback that we could pass along. I will say the good news is, as your kids progress through our system, there's quite a bit of that, particularly at the secondary level. The sophomore speech is legendary at Brighton High School, but this is a really good point, something we think is very important as we're preparing people to be in very different jobs as they move forward, and life experiences that will require them to be able to present and speak articulately about a topic. So thanks for that suggestion. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? I'll take a look at Facebook as well. There's a comment. I just want to say thank you to the staff at TCMS. Both of my daughters have had struggles this year, been able to work through them, and have felt supported by staff. We see you and recognize the hard work that has gone into making our temporary normal as possible. Thank you very much for saying that too. Really appreciate that feedback that we will pass along also. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll certainly hang on here for a minute if anybody has anything else, but we'll wrap it up if there isn't anything else that people would like to talk about or feedback they'd like to give. Again, we'll pass all the feedback along that you have given and through the exchanges that we go through every single comment. So thank you very much for taking the time to do that. Carrie and Sean, yes, they are. And that we've done a lot of outreach that way, actually K through 12, but certainly if that is something that you'd like to follow up on directly regarding your 8th grader, please reach out and let us know. And we'll certainly connect with you and connect with the counselor on that too. Very welcome, Rama. Happy to do it. Never dreamt of being a talk show host, but it seems to be part of the part of the deal these days. But happy to have the dialogue. So thanks to everybody for taking the time to come, and thanks for everybody who could contribute answers too. All right, have a great night, everybody. Take care, enjoy, and stay safe, stay healthy. Best wishes.
This has been a special presentation from 12 Corners Middle School.